Right, 15 minutes past 8 this morning. We're turning our attention to the centre depth chart, and I'm delighted to say Louise Galvin is with us. Today's a big day, Louise, because we're going to get to find out what Andy Farrell thinks about the number 10 question in particular. But also, there's a little bit of wiggle room around who might be his centres. Up until now, we've long thought the top four centres in the country were written in pen in selectors, but actually not anymore.
Yeah, well, probably our top three are still written in pen at this stage. And I guess what's unusual is that we think we have them all fit. Obviously, Robbie Henshaw pulled out of Leinster's squad against Montpellier at the weekend and was massively missed going with the sideline. But we're not sure if that was, it doesn't seem like there's any big injury coming out of the Leinster camp in terms of Robbie's availability. So we still expect him to be named. Obviously, he missed a lot of the autumn internationals, just came back from the Argentina game. But if you have Robbie, Gary and Bundy as your kind of set in stone three, and looking at Andy Farrell, if he's going to name another two more, there is a little bit of wiggle room there. I guess we know Chris Farrell has been, over the last few years, has been the next guy incumbent coming in, and he's done particularly well when he has come in. Like, he certainly hasn't let the squad down for his size, and Ballasti nearly expected more as a 12, but he's obviously, we know he's more of a 13, and even though he's a big guy, some nice deft touches. But then potentially one of the form players that we have in Ireland at the moment is James Hume, and we know Andy Farrell capped him last summer against the USA. He's played a lot of game time, which has been a struggle for some of our centres due to both injury and COVID over the season, and matches being cancelled. So he's probably the form centre, you could nearly say, if you were to just purely go on kind of stats and game time. And he was named in the autumn squad as well. So there's nothing he has done that, Andy Farrell could turn around and not include him, if that kind of makes sense, when he's already has included him in previous squads. And then we've Kieran Frawley, of course, as well in Leinster, who Andy is a fan of as well. And we're probably talking about that being our six that we're picking out of. Stuart McCluskey probably won't be back from a hamstring injury, certainly not for the Welsh game anyway. So that's probably where we're looking at, we think, with the centre depth chart.
Well, let's tease out the Hume conversation a little bit, because you've been in different codes, you've been in dressing rooms where you know that coaches, the best ability is availability, where you get into a team. And even the America game, right, where I think probably the rest of the world rugby focus was elsewhere, obviously, with the Lions shenanigans happening and Bundy playing well and Robbie Henshaw playing well. We probably underrate that game in terms of its significance to the management team, where they get to work with the players week in, week out for a period of time. Somebody new comes along. They're as prone to the normal human things that we are, like, oh, this is exciting and new. I get a new toy here. Let's see how it works. Hume comes in, really impresses them, plays well, plays a lot in the meantime, plays again in November, and they're like, he's our guy. And it just happens where there's this kind of sequence where you show up, you do well, you take your chances, and the coaching ticket goes, yeah, well, let's go. You're our guy now. Whereas we're still probably thinking, well, Chris Farrell was man of the match a couple of times when he played for Ireland a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and again, it's a bit of form versus tried and trusted and what you know. And Chris Farrell, it's obviously the slower start of the season. He was injured at the beginning of the year and then came back in. It was probably decent showing against Wasps and what was overall definitely Munster's most positive display of the season so far, when they were obviously had all the upset with COVID and with the South African trip. But then probably hasn't set the world alight since, and it's probably suffering a little bit from the fact that the Munster backline in general just hasn't clicked, and could count himself lucky to not have suffered a red card against Tom Farrell in that Connacht clash, because that was, I think, not too many people complained if he did get a straight red for that head-and-head collision when he shot up out of the line. So just things aren't clicking for Chris Farrell at the moment. Having said that, he has rarely done anything wrong when he's been called upon in terms of the Irish squad, and usually that has been as a result of an injury to the top three guys that, look, we're saying are going to be named no matter what. I think that the conversation with Bundy Robbie and Gary's about who actually is the best combination and who starts, but they're going to be your three guys. But I think Chris could be the guy to lose out because Kieran Frawley's played a bit of game time as well. Obviously Robbie missed the last day, so it was Frawley and Ringrose in centre. Obviously Andy Farrell's a fan. He brought him in autumn as well. And if we are looking at maybe slightly changing or playing our game and looking at the second playmaker role, we're not going to go with necessarily a 15. It could be that 12 position, and that's where Frawley's strength is compared to maybe Chris Farrell at 13. It's probably a bit of a balance of the 12s and 13s as well. Like we know Henshaw can play across both, but what Frawley could give you against maybe a Bundy as both the 12s as one as your straight up the jumper, and not that Bundy is just one dimensional, but that's what he's going to give you. He's going to give you massive tenacious defence. He's going to give you line speed. He's going to get you over the gain line, whereas Frawley's a bit more of that running threat and distribution threat. So even as 12s, they kind of might be slightly different pictures for Andy Farrell to pick. And then how does he leave James Hume out? Like what? I was trying to think if he was the guy to lose out, what's the conversation he can have with him? Okay, I've picked you. You got capped last summer. You get into the autumn squad. You've played probably more than any other centre this season, and you've had either close to man of the match performances or man of the match performances. Defence has been good. Gets an instant try against Leinster down in the RDS. Attack has been brilliant. Like he's top 3 all the time for Ulster in terms of carries, line breaks, really linking in well with his back three. So, and we know Andy Farrell wants that as well. He wants to get width into he wants someone who can carry, who can make a line break, but can also link in with back three players. So it's very hard to see him leaving him out, because what can he say to him to improve on? Or he can't even turn around and say you didn't get game time because of COVID or XYZ. Because he actually has, and he's taken his chances when he has.
Is there a case to be made that he gets dropped down the pecking order just because everybody else on your list of 6 names there has played with one another in some sort of combination? Obviously Frawley being at Leinster with Henshaw and Ringrose, Farrell and Aki have played with Henshaw and Ringrose at Ireland level. James Hume hasn't played other than obviously in his Ireland shirt with any of those players, and at Six Nations level he will be making his bow.
Yeah, and look, I'm more going off of who he's going to name in his squad. So I'm not saying, I suppose, unless we see maybe against Italy, but I'm not necessarily saying he's going to make his starting debut or anything in the Six Nations. I think it's very hard to leave him out of the squad altogether. And you can turn around and say, well, Chris Farrell's playing with Damon Diolande, or Rory Scanner, who's probably a bit down the chart, or likewise Bundy. So I don't think that would be a valid argument, no, because then you're saying everyone has to migrate to Leinster to get that extra bonus of having a partnership with the guys who are already there. So no, I don't think that's a fair argument, because I mean then you're just trying to say to people you have to work. If you're 9, you have to play where the most likely starting 10 is. So I don't think that's fair enough, no.
I think you're right about that conversation, really, and the flip side of that is that the conversation is you're in, well done, because you've done everything we've asked for you, and that actually is the right thing for a team dynamic, where you're not just grandfathering people in on the basis of what they have done in the Ireland shirt previously. It feels like there's always this split thing in coaches' minds, where they're loyal to the players who've been their best performance over a period of time because they know that they can get performances back from them in big games. But equally, at the fringes of your squad, or where somebody is bursting through, you have to give them the pathway and then follow the pathway through. And it looks like Hume's going to get in. Frawley's really interesting, because I do wonder if there's in Mike Catt's head in particular, given his own career, and he switched between positions and got into a team where he was the second playmaker when Johnny Wilkinson was there. If in his head he's thinking, I want him on the bench because he can cover a multitude of positions, and that might mean that we don't have to have a second 10 on the bench. He's our second 10, and we can have you can have Bundy and him on a bench at some point. I wonder if there's a bit of experimentation that we see in the Six Nations with the bench in particular that allows you to play players like that and in game situations see what it's like to have Sexton and Frawley and Bundy, or Sexton and Henshaw and Frawley, and just play around with these things, because they must be thinking about what life is going to be like in a tournament.
Yeah, that's definitely something that could be in my cat's head. I'm not sure if it's this Six Nations, because I think I'm just not sure you'd be throwing Kieran Frawley and going, okay, you could be covering centre or 10 in your debut Six Nations season. So that would be a huge ask for him. But then again, as I know you were chatting to Andy Dunn yesterday, it's not essentially very clear who our backup 10 is, but I would be surprised to see that. I think we're just not that much of a risk-taking team, I guess, or squad or management. And again, the other thing is covering centre for the autumn Six Nations. That was Keith Earls. So that's the one thing about the centre position. You get two starting positions, but a lot of the time there is no bench position, especially when you have Earlsy there and he can slot in at 13. And it seems from the autumn internationals that's where Andy Farrell sees his role as he's kind of coming towards the end of his career, is to be able to cover that whole, maybe be cover for the back three position and also covering centre, so that he has his 9-10 and then almost Earlsy as the next guy in. So yeah, it could be something that they're thinking of down the line. Definitely think they're trying to blood him in. So like for the likes of Hume and Frawley, it might be a case of they're being picked to just be in the environment, to be training week in, week out, to learn from the best guys, the guys that are there, and also obviously to put their hands up, whether there be an injury to the guys or whether there's a bit of squad rotation, because we know it's such a difficult campaign, the whole Six Nations campaign, that there's going to have to be some, not going to put the same 15 out week in, week out. And that's probably the beauty as well of our centre positions. Like we've rarely really figured out who our best two are. We think it's Henshaw and Ringrose together, but at the same time, Bundy has rarely left us down, and he obviously that he got selected for the Lions. I think it's probably, when it comes down to actual match day selection, it's a bit of horses for courses. So, for example, I know he's not going now, Jalabert, but if France were going with an Intimac and a Jalabert, do you go with the Bundy 12 and try and run him down Jalabert's throat, or do you more respect Jalabert's threat if he was there, or Intimac, and go with the Robbie 12 and Gary 13, and think more from a defensive point of view? So I think when it comes to the actual selection of your starting centres, it'll be a little bit of form. Obviously, this is depending on three of them being fit, but it'll also be a little bit of who you're playing against and what they're going to come up with.
You mentioned Bundy sticking it up the jumper, but not just being that. I think the game against New Zealand in particular, his passing range was excellent, and there's definitely been a period of time where we thought we knew exactly what Bundy was, but he has added more wrinkles to his game and a deeper understanding, it seems, of the nuances of the position, and is playing his best rugby at the moment. So for him to come out of the team would also be difficult, although he has just had injuries and is just back in terms of fitness too. So maybe that plays into the coach's mind, and that gives him an excuse to, we're just going to ease you back. But you could say the same about Robbie Henshaw too. So nail it for us here. Pick your two. Let's say Wales, right?
Yeah. So starting against Wales, I think we would go with Robbie 12 and Ringrose at 13. I think again it's tough on Bundy. It's not against something that he hasn't done, but even like the respect that the guys, that the centres that Robbie and Gary have from the players, like Henshaw's named player of the year this year. I'm pretty sure Ringrose got it last year for 2021. These guys are held in real high esteem. See Ringrose, he's really stepping up into that leadership role. I know he's had the odd kind of blip of a performance, but in general he's been pretty consistent. His defensive reading of the game 13 is excellent. And then Robbie was just incredible all season when he's gotten to play. So I just think them at their best is slightly better than Bundy, but it's not that Bundy has done anything. I think they just give us a little bit more. But it's not that Bundy's done anything wrong either. And when he's been called upon, he's had some phenomenal performances for Ireland as well. But look, they're all such attritional players that what are the chances you get into tournament week and one of them picks up a bit of a dead leg or anything? And I think there's such strength in that whole, the three of them, that if anyone picks up even half enough, they're not going to be risked. They're just going to go with the other two more than likely, because even they've all played enough with each other to have that balance that Robbie can go to 13 and Bundy can go to 12, and you wouldn't worry about any sort of a change of position there. And we know anyway that, you know, there's a little bit of that as numbers and shirts, and you know, often it's just first phase, or it can change a little bit based on maybe a particular strike play or where we are on the pitch. But I think it comes down to if they're all three are absolutely fighting fit, no injuries, no niggles, no knocks. I think you probably are going with Henshaw 12 and Ringrose at 13.
It does seem that this is the best level of depth at midfield for Ireland in quite some time, even just seeing Farrell down as a number 6 here. As the number 6 of this, I should say, obviously.
Yeah, and again, I wouldn't be massively surprised to see him in there. I'm kind of going off a little bit of form and a little bit of, you know, where we are. If we know what Chris Farrell can do. He's not firing on all cylinders. Munster aren't firing on all cylinders. As I mentioned, he had that little bit of, I suppose, a slight indiscipline issue against Tom Farrell, which, look, was line speed and stuff. But you could all point to this being a guy under pressure, whose team's under pressure as well. Whereas if you want to go with a little bit of youth, a little bit of form, if you want to give guys an opportunity this far out from World Cup to show that they should be involved in the squad, now is the time to do it, not next Six Nations. That's where I think Frawley and Hume get in. But it is crazy. And then you have Stuart McCluskey as well, who again is probably more kind of would have been after Chris Farrell in the pecking order in previous seasons. But is obviously has a bit of a knock at the moment as well. And again, we know what he does. He's pretty uncompromising. He's a massive ball carrier. He often, takes two tacklers to take him down. But again, we need to kind of see what these two guys, Frawley and Hume, can add that's a little bit different.
Well, I have one last thing I just wanted to ask you about. Eddie Jones has named 6 uncapped players in his squad, and the standout thing from this is in the London Times this morning, that he capped 23 players were capped in 2021. 23 new players were capped by him last year. After
6 more.
And 6 more, and their ages range from, I think, 20 to 24. So a 20-year-old wing fullback, a 21-year-old lock back row, a 21-year-old back row, a 23-year-old winger, and a 24-year-old centre. Not to mention the 20-year-old fly half, Orlando Bailey, who's been very impressive for Bath, despite the fact Bath are absolutely rubbish at the moment. We probably don't expect to see such turnover and change, and yet, I don't know, in a way, I do wonder. We're brilliant in year 3 of a 4-year cycle. We've won the Six Nations in year 3 of a 4-year cycle in the past. What's the point?
Yeah, and that's why I think we do want to see guys being rewarded for form as opposed to guys that have done it for us 2 years ago. Because we're not talking about, Chris Farrell, for example, and I don't want to keep berating on about Chris Farrell, but in 2019, he, as I say, put in some man of the match performances, came up really well when he was called upon. We're not talking about 2019, we're not talking about Japan anymore, we're talking about the next World Cup, and that's why we want to see guys who maybe might be below Chris in terms of how they play right now, but have the potential in 2 years to be above. So that's what are in 1 year, we're in 2023 now, or 2022, that are the potential to be above that level. And I think it's trying to find a balance. I think that's a huge turnover, and it's a little bit of mind games with Eddie. I think sometimes he can be very quick to discredit the players that have done a lot for him. And obviously we see the likes of George Ford, the Vunipolos out in the cold, and some of those guys have been around a long time, and maybe he's thinking, next year they're not going to be at their peak. But even something like Underhill isn't at that age, at that stage. I mean, to not be included at all, obviously is a huge disappointment for him. So it's trying to find a bit of a balance where you're looking at the guys who have done the job and will continue to do the job for another few seasons. Maybe not 4 or 5, but we're in 2022 now, so we're talking about up into next year. And at the same time, the guys who are really pushing, they were putting consistent, strong performances in for their club week in, week out, that aren't that far away, that you're also exposing them to that international environment, both training camps and eventually games. And you have to put them on if you want to know what they're going to do. So I think we're a bit more balanced in it. But I get what you're saying. I think previously we probably would have a bit more stick with the tried and trusted, whereas that's why I'm expecting Andy to probably throw not a few curveballs, but even outside of the centre partnership, like we want to see a Balakun. I think a lot of people want to see Michael Lowry, because even if you want to see a young guy or a young player looking in going, I want to know that if I put in incredible performances back to back consistently and I work my way up through the system, that I'm going to get rewarded and I'm going to get given a shot. And I think as regular punchers, we all want to see that too.
Yeah, definitely. Louise, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Louise Galvin giving us her centre depth chart there.